So hello everybody, and welcome to what's going to be hopefully a series of short interviews. I thought it'd be quite interesting to interview some people around their research projects and how they developed on their PhD. So today I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Lesley Deacon. Lesley, hello, welcome.
Hello, hi.
So Lesley is a senior lecturer in social work, a Vice Chancellor's Research and Knowledge Exchange Fellow, a Senior Fellow at AdvanceHE, and a registered social worker in the UK. Lesley's area of interests are neurodiversity and practice research. Lesley has developed a new approach to empower practitioners across a range of professions to engage in and lead practice research called the Facilitated Practice-Based Research, FPR. This model is neurodiverse and trauma-informed and consists of an intensive facilitated research program in which a group of practitioners work together to co-design, co-construct, and co-implement a piece of practice research relevant to current practice issues. Oh my gosh, that was a mouthful and a half, wasn't it, as I said that? But it sounds really interesting. So hopefully we
Thinking
can.
it sounded good when I wrote it, but hearing it said back to me is
I should have practiced that a bit more. Just getting tongue-tied, as I was saying. But we're going to dive into kind of all of
yeah,
those
yeah.
different things that you're doing and that you've been up to. But one of the things, I suppose, maybe to introduce people to you and let them know a little bit about you is a little bit about what led you to undertake a PhD or a professional doctorate in the first place.
Yeah, well, I thought I had to think about that this morning about what on earth, why did I end up doing it? And I think so I was going to detail, but I think it started just because I actually did a research methods master's completely by accident. Just because I was working with Durham University and it was an option, and I thought, oh, I'll have a go. And I found it very difficult, but very informative. And it was after that that I then retrained as a social worker. So I did the research bit first,
Yeah.
then I kind of went into practice. And as I went into practice, I realized that I was really, I've been saying it to people recently, I'm just really nosy. And I want to know, I don't just want to know what something is. I want to know, yeah, but why? Why's that happened? So when I was in practice, I then noticed some things about, yeah, but how do we make decisions? And where do we get all this information from? So how do I know what to do? So it was the sort of combination of those two things that led me to apply for a funded PhD, which I then did alongside my practice, which
Brilliant.
was very difficult. I don't sugarcoat
Yeah.
that. It was really tough.
I can imagine. So I was doing my PhD whilst also working as a full-time social worker.
Yeah.
So I know what that can be like. Yeah.
It's really hard, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think I felt very separated. I had two separate things and I kind of tried to keep them into two parts of the week and keep them separate. And it was weird for me that they didn't kind of go together, or they didn't feel like they went together. It felt like, well, if I'm in practice, I'm doing this, and nobody kind of wanted to know what I was doing in the research. And then the research side, it was like, well, it doesn't matter what you do in the practice, you need to come and do this, and you need to go to all these, groups and be part of a network. And I just thought, I can't do that. I've got to do my PhD, and then I've got to go and do my work. So I
And
think that navigation was part of what I did later, why I got interested in practice research, I think.
I think that's really interesting. I was thinking about trying to do my PhD alongside working as a social worker, and I almost feel the same. Like I kind of did the PhD, but then finished social work and then kind of went into research. And I was thinking about that practitioner researcher,
Yeah.
which really you would want to encourage really people who work
Yes.
researchers and in practice,
Yeah.
but actually trying to do both of those things is quite difficult
It's
at the same
really
time.
difficult. And it's ended up being because my topic for my PhD was about children who display harmful sexual behavior. But actually, what my interest became was about the fact that it was about parent carers and how social workers worked with them, because that's where the information was largely coming from and where the protective factors may be. And I was interested in that. And then, but that developed into, but actually, I'm really interested in how we inform our practice with research, and the fact that there was this disconnect. So it ended up being really the practice research bit that I ended up really interested in, because that's where I was. And I think I said to someone recently, I very much felt like they're two sides. You've got the practice and the research. And what I did was I was in the middle, and I decided rather than trying to be one or the other, I'd just get really comfortable and just sit there and refuse to move and start to try and pull the threads from the two sides. Because I think that fundamentally there are differences that are there. So, you know, practitioners can't easily get access to journal articles, for example, and then journal articles are not written necessarily for practitioners. And I was starting to think, well, that's already different. So how can we, rather than just saying, okay, well, we need to give them access to that, well, you can't tell a local authority you must subscribe to this or that. How do we kind of then, I think about, how do we take the research core principles into the practice environment? Like, how do we get in there?
How do you translate that knowledge into
Yes.
practice? And it's
Yes.
not always necessarily accessible.
No.
And I'm also thinking about when you're in practice, like a lot of people don't have time to actually sit down and read an academic journal article, you know, and analyze, or is this relevant to my practice or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's other ways we can communicate that.
There is, isn't it? That's why you and I talked about the fact that we both do podcasts. Yeah. There's one of those ways about making it more accessible. Yeah. But I think for me, because so it's very much, I'm part of this journey, and after doing my PhD, I got diagnosed as autistic, which helped me make sense of things. And it was starting to make me realize why I really needed complete clarity on something in order to be able to understand what to do with it. And I realized that that need in my head for clarity was something that actually could be helpful for practitioners, because really research is a completely different language. Academic research, you have to learn the language, and it's a whole different language. And I thought, yeah, but practitioners talk in the same way, they just use different words. Yeah. So I started to think, well, what about if we did a research course that was actually using practice language rather than research language, but the philosophy and all of that, it's all still the same. It's all still there. So that's what I've
It's how you communicate
done.
it.
Yeah.
There was something resonating for me there in terms of, I think it was I was speaking to Linda Finley, who does like reflexivity and things like that.
Yes.
And she was talking about kind of asking her why does she write, and she was basically saying, so I can understand myself. If I can write it out clearly, I'm investigating and I'm kind of learning as I'm going along. And I think sometimes people think kind of research or other writing, it's like, oh, it's because you've got all this stuff to say. Well, yeah, you might have stuff to say, but also there's a learning process as you go into that activity as well.
Yeah, because it's only writing about it. Because I didn't realize what I was doing. I was just kind of doing things. And then, I was being asked, but so what's your topic? And I was like, I have no idea. What is my topic? And then I started to realize, well, it was kind of like this crossover between teaching and research. And it was kind of like I was trying to make it so that when we're doing the teaching of research, we actually do the research as we go. And actually, if we do it together, and try and make sense of it together, that you've got that support system that develops with the people. And I realized afterwards that I produce practice reports with the people I do the research with, which are the practitioners. So we all write it together and they give me bits as we go. That just makes sense to me when you put all of that together at the end. Writing the journal articles, I still find challenging, because I then think, okay, I've got to frame this, I've got to look at it in a particular way, I've got to change my language. Whereas I definitely feel for me, the language of practice is still where I'm comfortable, which for me is, there's a clarity in it, you know, that it's, and maybe it's not for people outside of social work, maybe it's just that it's a social work language, but what I do does transcend other disciplines. So I think it's more about just clarity.
And I think there's something about, you know, not lots of practitioners, social workers or counselors, they're not necessarily researchers or academics. No. So how useful is it if we're writing things in a certain way that's inaccessible to people, that's not kind of doesn't make sense, you know, common sense in terms of dialogue and talking about it.
No, they don't. They don't need that, do they? They don't need to speak like that. They need to keep speaking the way they are. So that's why I think going to them and taking this into their environment makes more sense.
I love that. You've hinted at this a little bit, but kind of what inspired you to explore your research topic then? So I suppose
Well,
it sounds like it's changed
it
actually what you
has.
research now compared to your thesis.
I definitely didn't have an idea, and the person, Professor Simon Hackett at Durham, that's his area of expertise, and I was very much connected to him. And it was my idea to explore it in the way that I did, but it definitely came from, at the time, being really interested in his work around harmful sexual behaviour, because it was Simon Hackett that started to talk to me about practice research, and it was him that introduced me to the work of Professor Owen Epstein in the States, who first started about practice-based research, and he's very keen on it, you know, being very much about practitioners seeing things and having access to material. You know, you make recordings as you go, and there's all of that information there that actually could tell us a lot if we then did some research on it. And I think when I was doing it, it was still very much in its infancy. I think that there's more scope for it now, but I think at the time I did struggle with being able to kind of justify that for my examiners, and at the time of doing my doctorate. And I don't think it was quite, I think there's a combination of, I wasn't as confident about what it was because I was still very much a practitioner, and I had to frame it in the language of academia. And I definitely struggled with that. And I don't hide from that, because I think, well, it's not about intelligence, it's just about, you know, the language of research and the language of academic research. And but I became, you know, really interested in, I want to do that more. And I think practitioner's skill set aligns itself to research, because it's what you do when you're doing an assessment. You're doing a piece of research, you know, you don't just take one thing of information, you try and get lots of information from different sources to try and understand the issue. You get it in different languages because you get it from the health visitor, you get the information from the teacher, it's different. You have to try and make sense of that for that child or that family you're working with, because obviously mine was with children, and then you try and come up with a plan and you try and make sense of it and you try and do something. So for me, that is applied research. That's what
Well,
it is.
well, it's interesting because I was going to ask you next about if you got any tips for anybody undertaking a
Yeah.
doctorate. One of the things I was thinking about, is one of the challenges there was actually, if you're a practitioner, social worker, or whatever, actually then becoming a researcher, and all those skills that you use are going to be really useful, but
They are.
also then you are entering into a different frame of academia
Yes.
where the structures and the what's expected is
Yeah,
different
yeah.
maybe from what's in practice.
Yeah, I'm working currently with I've got to get the right acronym. So it's the NIHR. Do you put show notes in, Peter? So
Yes, yes, I
yes,
will do. Yes, I will.
need some links. And they're currently called the Local Clinical Research Network. And I think they're going to be something else, and I can't remember. I think it's RRDN, and I can't remember what it stands for. I'm still trying to remember. This is a good example of acronyms are difficult when you're just learning them. But we recently, you know, I'm doing some work with them along with the NIHR, and trying to we've sort of separated almost, there's the doing of research and then there's the industry of research. And it's like there's a whole industry there, which depending on where you're going, because my PhD was funded with the Economic and Social Research Council, so that was a different sort of industry element. Now I'm very much on getting funding through the NIHR, and that's separate to the doing of it. So for practitioners, the doing of it is like practice. It's just you're not then dealing directly with people in the first instance, you're dealing with information that's out there. So instead of it being like a health visitors report, it's a journal article of, you know, this is what we currently know about this situation. Those to me are the same sort of things. So the skill set, what I try to do with practitioners is encourage them to see the links, that actually what they do is research. It's just a different type of it. It's just named different. It's no less valuable than the academic research. So it's about reframing those skills as research, seeing yourself as, yeah, I do it all the time, but I do it in this environment. So we call it a bit different to other people, but when we were with these practitioners recently, I think the massive advantage practitioners have, certainly social workers, is they see the more nuance of people's lives. So they understand, so things like participation in research, that's a big agenda issue, is they do see the challenges that people will have in participation because they're used to working with people around challenges, more so than someone that's, say, coming from a very academic position and not knowing the life experiences of people. And I think social workers and other practitioners who see that have an advantage there.
I was thinking about sometimes academia can feel like it's extracting things from people, and I think what social workers are very good at is actually meaningful participation,
Yes,
you know, in a process. So yeah, those skills are going to be useful.
they are, and
Researchers.
they are researchers already. So that's what I think I like to sort of try and say. And you can say that and they won't believe it
Yeah.
until they do it. But I think the work I do with them, they then start to go, oh, okay. And it starts to make sense. But the work I'm doing with them, Peter, as well, is about keeping them in practice. It's not about, of course, some people will come out, but for most, it's about keeping them in. And I was meeting with Adam Graham, who's the principal social worker in North Tyneside yesterday, and he called it practice near, is what I'm doing. And I quite like that because it's this near practice. It's about not saying, look, I'm going to train you all and then the universities are going to pinch you. You know, of course, we still want some people, but we don't need all of them. And they practice need the experts to stay. So I would really like to see practitioner researchers becoming a new route in social work.
I think that's brilliant, and it's like developing that network, isn't it, of practitioners and researchers, and having them kind of interconnected, so that we're all working together, but in separate places, you know.
Yeah, because we don't all need to be in the same place. It's about how do we sort of, I was just talking to a doctoral student just before this podcast and saying, you know, afterwards it's about your doctorate is often about you on your own going and doing something. But after that, it's really about the fact that you can't just keep doing that on your own. You need your networks and you need the people who, you know, you can explore these issues with and then try to do something. Because for me, I like the idea that research is useful. Don't like the idea that it's not. And it doesn't mean that people can't do research that is abstract. Of course they can, but in social work, we need it to be useful. We need to be able to see what does it look like though? What do we do with it? You know, when I'm out visiting this family or visiting this older person, what do I do? You know, and being research informed means that we've got to do more steps around that because it's not quite in there yet as it is in, say, other professions.
I was thinking how quickly people might realize that lesson as they do social worker training and it's kind of theory based in discussion, then actually going into practice
and then going,
oh gosh, this is what it's like. You know?
Yeah, because it's the most important thing for me on all of it is that experience. You've got to have the experience and you've got to go in. I was really adamant because I could have not gone in. I did my social work qualification and I could have not gone in to do practice. I could have just gone down the research route. For me, I'm not saying this is the same for everybody. I had to see it. I thought, how can I talk about, and my conversation with, you know, the colleagues in the networks that I have is that it's not really changed a lot since I left. So I keep up with, you know, seeing what it's like. And I checked recently. So do you still do these things? It's like, yeah, we still do that. And there's a comfort in that, but there's also like, but is that right?
Yeah. Or have things not shifted or changed or
Yes.
evolved since then? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just variations on a theme. It's the same themes that are going around, and different local authorities have different focus at different times. But I would like to see there is creativity in there, and I'd like to see that kind of emphasized more, I think, and focused on more.
How did you find the actual process of completing your PhD? Have you got any like specific memories from that time?
I'm very honest, but autistic people do go with complete honesty. It's awful. So yeah, I'm very honest about it. I didn't enjoy the experience of it. I think that the balance was very difficult to manage between the two. And I think because I was a practitioner researcher, I call myself that. Although based in an academic environment, I'm still a practitioner researcher. And I think that I think at the time that was a very difficult line to follow. And I remember during the process thinking possibly a professional doctorate might have been a better option, because that is much more practice focused. I'm very practice focused. So I remember thinking at the time, this is maybe not the route to go down. I did continue though along it, but it was not an easy route at all. And it doesn't mean that that is the same, you know, for everybody. And as I've become a supervisor myself, I'm very particular about the journey that people go on and supporting them through that journey because of, you know, remembering my own struggles with things and those feelings of that you're not good enough, because they were definitely there. And I really get quite annoyed about that practitioners end up feeling like that, because they are good enough and they are intelligent people to be doing what they're doing in the first place. And I think that interest for me is what led me into the sort of neurodiversity interest, the fact that actually there are different ways of explaining things or engaging with things, but intelligence is there. It's the same, but you end up feeling like you're not as good.
I'm wondering whether there's something about that PhD process which can feel quite isolating and kind of being on your own.
You are on your own. Yeah, you are.
And I was also wondering when you were saying when you kind of continued on, I was wondering actually how maybe was it difficult to like turn back? Like you're on the path and then was it difficult to then go, actually, this is difficult.
Yes.
I want to do it in a different way or whatever. Really, you just kind of felt like you had to solve
I
your own.
felt what I've likened it to. So I think because I'm now almost 10 years postdoc, I think you get a kind of confidence about where you are. And I'm starting to feel that. And I have now challenged that environment and said, you know what, I've used Bourdieu's theory about fields and said, you know, that's about you know, the academic research field is about there's symbolic power held in that and reinforced in the language of that. And I've challenged that in a sense because I think particularly for research that's applied, that is problematic. And so I have challenged it. And what I say is that I learned the rules of the game. I did learn and I applied myself to that. And now I want to change them. So I have done it, I have learned and I have gone down that route. And now I feel like yeah, it's also, I think there's an age thing as well. When you hit a certain point, you think, nah. You know, I'm at this point in my career where I think actually I'm okay to challenge it. It doesn't mean I'm right all the time. And I'm quite, you know, I'm a very reflective person. So I'll accept somebody saying to me, have you thought of it this way? And I'll go, okay, let's have a think about that. But I think we're still, nothing's changed like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pete.
Oh no, I was just going to say it can be really difficult, I think, when you're doing your PhD to feel that confidence.
Yeah,
like
it wasn't there.
I really admire people who are kind of in the middle, kind of challenging things,
yes,
and kind of pushing forward. And I feel like a little bit similar. I feel like I've got more confidence now.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm, you know, I've got an academic position, and
yeah,
I feel like I've got to a point where I'm like, well, actually, no, I feel like I can share my voice, and it's okay for it to be heard, and to disagree, and to kind of put my own thoughts out there. But I think a lot of the time, particularly if you come from a practitioner background, you might not have that confidence to kind of argue things in that way.
No, and I think that framing of practice it's not research from an academic research perspective. The framing of that, then for me, what it comes down to is elements of research anxiety, that they're kind of socialized into that anxiety that, oh, well, we don't do it and therefore we can't do it. And it's not true. And so that's what sort of underpins what I do, which is to use all of their practice knowledge and skills, and I adapt to what they do. and I bring the academic in there. I have the words, the academic language is there in tiny, tiny writing, so that if I've had like, because I've done research on what I do because I want to know, is it working? How is it experienced? Because I'm not experiencing it, I'm giving it. And so I've done research on that, and I found it interesting that I had feedback on two people in the same cohort, one who said there's no academic language in there, it's all about practice, it's all in these terms, and then someone else said, so it's all about the philosophy of research, and it's like, and it was the way they were thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, that to me said, yes, that's it, I've done it. It's like, because it's not about, I really dislike phrases like dumbing down, I really dislike that. Clarity isn't about that, it's about being clear in our language. Language can be really obscure, so when you have got a brain like I've got, which is all about the in detail, it's like I constantly say to people, I don't know what you're inferring there. What do you mean? Why you use that word, but what do you mean by that word?
Someone on it's not called Twitter now, someone on X a few weeks ago had posted a abstract from an academic paper, and was kind of have a look at this and see what you think, and you couldn't understand, the language is so convoluted.
But
it was interesting to see, because there was lots of respected academics kind of underneath going, what on earth is this? What on earth is this trying to say? This makes no sense, it's become so convoluted. I think it's important, things like that, because sometimes it can feel like like you were saying before, that internalized, it's me, I'm not clever enough to figure this out, where actually, like, the clever thing to do is to actually be able to communicate what it is that you're saying in clear, simple language, so that it's accessible and people can understand it. So actually, sometimes when that language becomes so complicated, it actually just takes away from the point of what the person
it does. And it's off-putting, and it's not helpful, I think. And I think there's a perception that that's what you have to do, and I always prefer, no, I'd rather understand what you mean than try and sit there trying to work it out myself. I'd rather you were clear in the way that you tell me than it was then on me to understand it, because it shifts that emphasis, doesn't it? And I think that, I think we do too much of trying to sort of fancy up the language, and I definitely think let's just be clear, and ask questions as well, I think. And acknowledge that I know I have colleagues who have only known me as an academic, so see me in a particular way as, well, you've got your PhD, you've done this, you've achieved this, but I'm still the person that didn't understand how to do critical analysis, who was getting feedback as a student going, you're too descriptive. And I was like, but I don't understand how to be critical. What do you mean? How do I do it? And it was a journey. Some people can get to this point really quickly, and others like me, it took me longer. But that's okay.
I think that's the difficult thing when you kind of got an academic position, maybe you've had something published or whatever, or you're leading research projects, and students or other people don't see the failures, the mistakes, the kind of all those things that have happened along the way that you kind of, lots of us don't talk about necessarily, or aren't open about. So people think it's been this kind of easy sailing path,
and it's not,
and it's not. And actually, I think about some of the mistakes I've made where I kind of cringe now, where I think, oh gosh, I can't believe I did that. But what I learned from it afterwards was, oh, okay, I won't forget that, so it has helped me as well.
And learning about the sort of, like, I find writing really difficult. I do, and I'm supposed to be, and I will be writing a journal article at the moment. And it's a challenge, and it's not changed. That has not changed. It has not become easier. I think my writing has improved, but it hasn't changed how hard it is to get there with it. It isn't something that for me is a natural thing that I have. It's hard work, and it's many drafts, and redoing it, and getting your feedback off your reviewers, and trying not to get defensive and upset by it, and instead thinking, okay, if that's what they're saying, then I haven't been clear, which is easier said than done. and taking that on board. But it isn't, for most people, I would say it's not an easy you know, journey. It's not a, I only know of one person in my whole life who went straight from A levels to, you know, degree to PhD. I'm sure there are more, but in my life, most people I know, it's not a quick,
Yeah.
easy fix. And
I was thinking
yeah,
about that publication process as well, though. And,
yeah,
you know, students hand in an essay and they get feedback and marks, and they see like tutors or whatever getting published, and they think, oh gosh, you know, how do I get to that point? But you submit an article, you get feedback, you get critique, it could go through multiple reviews, then it
yeah,
gets edited, then it gets proofread, then some, you know, sometimes with the journal they check all the references and make sure it's okay.
yeah,
So it's like,
yeah.
so the finished product, you know, is not necessarily just one person's
It's
work.
not.
It's gone through a whole process.
It has,
And
yeah.
usually, even if there's only one author, you might have shared it with colleagues to have a look at or whatever, you know,
You
for
don't
guidance
do
and
it
stuff.
on your
But
own. You don't. You
yeah,
do. That's why you need your sort of support and your networks. And that's where I remember doing my first article, and didn't register, you know, I didn't understand, you know, what I was writing for and who it was. And it took me a while to understand how to write for a particular journal, because each journal's different. And I didn't get it. And I just tried to summarize my PhD into a journal
that's
article.
so funny. That's exactly what I
Is
did
that
with
what
my
you
first
did?
paper. Just literally tried to cram every argument
Yes.
into 7,000 words, and they were
Yes.
like, "What?" They were like, "What is going on?"
Exactly. And I just didn't get it. And even with the feedback, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. And then I
Yeah,
gave up. So that's where I was like, well, this is not for me. Clearly, I haven't managed that. And then I went off somewhere else. And it was just more, I just needed more time to, you know, I think to process what had happened, to understand, well, what was I interested in? Where did I want to go with this? And it just became an organic thing that it
yeah,
turned out that I was, or seemingly good at getting my point across. So having in the teaching room, you've got an abstract concept. I was able to say, yeah, well, what this is really just this, and explain things in that way. And that's where it was like, maybe I could do that with research as well, but you restricted in the programs that you teach, that you need to teach all the concepts of research. So I started to think, well, maybe I could do it, you know, as a CPD module, and then I don't have to teach ontology and epistemology and methodology. And I'd still teach it, but I don't have to tell them this is what that is. But I'll do that later. I'm not getting rid of it. I'm just saying, let's not start there. Let's start with what people know, give them the confidence, and then we'll say, so what that is this, and then what that is that. So that comes in later on.
so it's almost like teaching it practically and
Yes.
then adding the labels on afterwards, because actually sometimes it's the labels that put people off of thinking,
Yeah.
I'll never understand that or get there. Made me think
Yeah.
about what all we were talking about in terms of articles, and I was thinking about both of us trying to put our whole PhD thesis into an article. And actually, possibly one of the things I've learned about my own writing is actually I'm simplifying things. I'm
Yes.
not putting absolutely everything in there. And
Yeah.
actually, that whole thing of like trying to be clever in academia and almost this unspoken pressure of, oh, it's got to be this big thing.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes you're just arguing like one singular point, but
It's
you're
just one point.
doing it in
Yeah.
detail, you
Yeah.
know.
It's the deep dive. I think it's like
Yeah,
you kind of have all of these things, and what I end up doing with the practitioners is we always do something that's exploratory, because there isn't a lot already out there on some of the issues that come up for the practitioners. So the last cohort I did, we were looking at they wanted to look at supervision in social work, and there isn't actually a lot of research in the UK on supervision in social work. So where in an academic side that you're trying to sort of, you know, you're going and you're looking for what existing research is there's not loads. So most of the time we don't, okay, we'll just explore it, we'll ask some really big open questions, and we'll just see what we can find. And what that does is then that gives sort of a basis for then lots of different things to come from that, where you can focus in, or so that's what I'm busy from the previous project. I'm busy writing on something at that with the practitioners. That was on safeguarding. So safeguarding, yes, is a big issue, but actually what they did was, as social workers, they asked other professionals, so like health, education, police, housing, social care, what do you experience when you have to deal with the social worker around safeguarding issues? So asked it from that perspective. And that's what the report looked at. This is all the issues they said. But the article we're writing is actually just called Time to Talk. And it was about the issue, that one issue of, well, actually, if we could just have some time with them to talk things through, so that as a teacher, I could understand, like, why you're not accepting this referral. And you could then tell me, explain that back to me. And then that could mean I don't put in a referral like that next time because I know why. And just having that time. So the whole article is going to be about that little slot of time, which is one thing that we found. One.
It sounds great. We can put that in the show notes when it comes out.
I've got to get it written.
I know. I'm ahead of you.
There has been a presentation on it. One of my colleagues, Dean Stamp, he's a practitioner. He went and presented on that at the European Social Work Conference. So that was a nice experience to get. I send social workers abroad to conferences because I don't travel. So they go and present our work. So that's why it's good to know me.
Yeah.
There's usually a trip in it if you like travel, and as opposed to me who doesn't. But yeah.
I want to make sure that we get this in because I think it's really interesting. But do you want to talk a little bit about the facilitated practice-based research model
Yeah,
developed, because it sounds really interesting.
it's kind of what I've been referring, you know, the things I've talked about, Peter, obviously are related to that. And what it is it's become a program. So I have got an accredited module with it now, but it's basically all of these things put into a teaching and research intensive program. And basically what I do is, so hopefully I can connect up my adverts on this as well to the podcast, because I've just been discussing the fact that I want to do it online. I've taught it online, I've taught it in person. I think you can't really get away from the benefits of in-person things, but I am quite good online. I've enjoyed being online. That was one of the benefits of the lockdowns. I actually enjoyed it because I can sit in my comforting surroundings and teach. And what I do is basically it's done with sort of a cohort of people of between about 10 and 15. And together what we do, so it is a research module, it's a CPD module, and we do a piece of research together. So I teach by doing, the people doing it learn by doing. So we start the process with, we don't know what we're going to do. And I get to know the group of people we're working with, and we find a common ground between the group. So it's not individual projects, it's one project where we find something to explore. And through the stages, each point in the teaching is a part of the research process. So I sort of say, right, let's think about this, but it's all in the language of practice so that it makes sense. And we then come up with a topic, we do the research on the topic, and as practitioners go, they each do a little bit of the process. So, you know, some of, like we mentioned about some of the challenges for practitioners doing research, time is a big factor. So we both obviously try to do PhD and work at the same time. It's a reality. I'd love it if practitioners could get a day off a week properly to be able to do research. The reality of that is understaffed. Everything's understaffed at the moment, under-resourced. So rather than that, it's about the pockets of time that they have. So like, for example, doing trying to find out what current research is there out there, rather than just one person having to find everything. We do a little, everyone does a little bit, and then everyone gets one article to read and summarize. My role is to make sense of that. So it's quite challenging, but I try and make sense of that. So it means that through the process, the research is done as you go, a tiny little step at a time.
Sounds really collaborative as well.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a group work. So you get to know the people, because it's also then becomes a network. So you've got the people that you go through it with, because having like-minded individuals around that you can then go to. So I still talk to the practitioners that I've worked with years ago, because their work is really important. So we get this piece of research, and the end of that is there's a practice report there, and every person gets it. It's an open document. We just put it out there. It's not a published piece. It's just, I do get it proofread though and edited to make sure it's not full of my errors, but it's everybody's work all put together. And then we can do something with that. So, the local authorities then have that, and they can look at it and say, okay, what are we going to do? what I think is the important piece with that is it's not framed from one perspective. It's just, this is what we found. And I think that's an important first step, because as soon as you write a journal article, it's framed and it's written in a language and it's inaccessible. So with the first step is the report. And then what I do with those practitioners, so the first cohort that did this, we then went and shared the research. So like went to conferences, some of them in academia, some in practice. We presented, we shared as much as we can. And then based on the conference we went to, we submitted an abstract for one bit of it. So with that cohort, which is the first formal cohort, we've now got to that. The idea is it's an organic connection where the practice is first and then the academia bit comes. And each of those individuals is on their own journey now. And they're going, you know, so the idea is to hopefully keep as many in practice as they can. And some have got roles that are more research-minded roles within their practice environments. And I think only one person is left to become academia, and that's out of about 30 people.
Wow.
So it's not,
yeah,
it's not everyone. Mostly they stay.
That's fantastic.
It's great fun as well.
Yeah, it sounds really
Yeah.
interesting, and I love the collaborative element. Everyone gets to contribute but do different
Everyone.
parts. Whereas we were talking about research can feel really isolating sometimes, so, and a bit daunting. So that process sounds fantastic. Lesley, you have so much going on. You've got that, you've got your teaching, your other research, which we haven't even talked about all of that.
I know.
And your podcast as well, which I said, you said you've got a third series coming out, which we will link to in the show notes as well.
Yes. Oh, I think I've overdone it. I was advised a couple of years ago to get out and do some networking, and I think I've maybe gone like, too far. I mean, I'm trying to pull back a little bit and say, okay, because I've got, so that is, because what happens is that is my teaching then. My teaching is my research. So it kind of, in some sense, it's a lot, but in other senses, people will have, well, that's my teaching and that's my research. Mine is always interconnected. So my other teaching I do is advanced safeguarding children. So when I bring in research into that to share with practitioners, so I'm always looking for opportunities to share research in a way that's accessible. So that's what the podcast that I do with my colleague, Dr. Sarah Lombe, we do those. And we started off with just, articles that we produced at the university in Sunderland. And then we've done focus series. So we've done one on domestic abuse. The one that's about to come out is on social work with older people. And our fourth season that we're going to do this next year is going to be on neurodiversity. So that is I think my dog's moving at the moment. He's having a little stretch since I know this is going up on the video as well. He wants to be in it. So that side of it, it's almost like the podcasting is almost like the hobby side of, I just keep that bit doing. My other research, so I've also now got I'm an ARC fellow, so that's with the NIHR, and that is actually to look at the impact of what I've done with this model to see what has that changed in practitioners and in the organization. So look at the kind of ripple effect of practitioners then going back into their environments and what has that changed. So I've got time to do that as an impact case study to see, what's going on. I've produced a couple of articles on that already, but my focus around my research is I'm starting to develop a bid which is around neurodiversity. And what I'm particularly interested in is parent carers experiences. So in the midst of everything, I think I did a piece of research a while ago that was on parent carers experiences. And when I was writing it, I didn't realize that I was becoming one. And it was really interesting because I didn't know I was. And then I am one. So there's a real push in neurodiversity around the voices of the people with experience. So as an autistic person, I've got something to say about being neurodivergent. It's not just about being told, by medical professionals, this is what you are, this is what your life's like. There's a lot of emphasis around our ability to tell, actually, this is what's going on in my brain and this is what it's like. So I'm starting that process. I'm trying to give myself time, Peter, because I know I've got a tendency to, go, oh, that's really exciting, let's do that bit. I'm trying to just focus in on that. So I've started working with a group of parent carers to share their experiences, which is where we are at the moment. And we're going to inform the bid, because I think what people don't necessarily see is when you're trying to get funding, so the industry of research, when you're trying to get the funding, you've kind of got to already have your ducks in a row before. And you're just like, well, no, that's what I'm going to do. That's where my brain went, well, no, I'm going to do that after. And then people, no, you've got to be doing it and have it all set up first. So I'm applying for little bits of funding to give, you know, remuneration to these parent carers for giving me their time and their experience to inform a research bid.
It seems back to front sometimes, doesn't it?
Yes.
In terms of that's why I want the money to be able to do this, but you've actually got to prove that you're already doing it to get the money.
Which is what I just think, but that makes no sense. But it is what it is. I always, you know, I think, really? Okay. Because I've put in bids and it's just like, no, you know, because I'm quite confident that if I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. I do tend to, but they don't know me and they don't know that's true. And it's,
and when you're competing with other people, the standards just get higher and higher in terms of what people expect.
And the universities want more, you know, funding and more money. It's all, you know, this time things are quite challenging across higher education. And I think that for me, there's a little bit of the spark has sort of dimmed a little bit. It'll hopefully return. I don't want to be too negative, but, you know, it is challenging. And I think across the board, colleagues have been, you know, made redundant, and it's not a positive time. I think hopefully we'll come through it and things will return. But yeah, it means then you're sort of more aware of how much money you're bringing in and things like that.
Yeah.
Which I kind of thought I would never do, but here I am.
The pressure never goes away. It just seems to change slightly to a different type of pressure. Yeah.
It is different. I remember coming into university and the relief of not feeling responsible for children's lives. I did very much feel that in practice, and I thought, oh, thank goodness. But then a more experienced colleague said to me, it'll just move to something else, just wait. And sure enough, you know, within a year I was like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. And then it changed, and then it's something else. And yeah, there's always something, isn't there?
There is, but I don't want to end on a
no
on
a like, oh,
we're exhausted.
Oh dear. I think
but there is a reality, there's a realism in there around social work and also around academia and what they can
there is, but I suppose to be more positive, I do think that individuals can make a difference. And I think that I think you can sort of lose sight sometimes of the small things that you've done that have made a difference to somebody. And I think that happens, you know, in practice and in research, that actually you don't always get to see it, but you know, it's that ripple effect that actually you could have done something. I think if you practice in a way, I think all practice is about, whatever it is, whether any environment, is about being positive and supportive and listening to people and realizing that the little world that we live in is not necessarily the same as everybody else's. So actually really listening to how I've got this whole thing about just because you intend something doesn't mean that's how it's received. And I think that's a real important message for everything, which is about listening to how something receives it, because you don't get to decide that, it's them. And if they've struggled with something you've done, then just listen to that. You know, we're getting very defensive at times, and I think let's just accept it, you know.
Well, lots of feelings come up for people, don't they, around kind of wanting to do something right. So to hear some critique can be really challenging.
It is.
Hopefully, as reflective practitioners, we're able to
hopefully,
even if we can't always do it in the moment, sometimes we can go away and then reflect.
I think it's okay. I because I go up and go, what?
Yeah.
That's not what I meant. But then having a little, okay, hang on a minute, hang on.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, is that more positive?
Yeah, I think so. Lesley, it's been an absolute joy. I love chatting to you. And I think you're also such a positive person, and I kind of love that. No, I feel that every time I'm with you, and kind of the energy that you have around projects. And so I knew this would be like an interesting discussion to kind of talk about. And some of the work that I didn't even know you were doing, it's been really interesting to kind of.
I know there's still others that we haven't got time.
Absolutely, but we can chat again. It's
Yeah,
fine.
come back about the next one. I know we've always chatted.
Yeah.
We've only ever met in this environment, haven't we?
We have actually, yeah, we have only met virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's room for us to meet in person at some point in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it shows though that you can, you know, form relationships online, and
Absolutely.
you know, it's, I don't know, that sounded dodgy in my head for a second there. But yeah, I think you can. I think that, you know, you can still show who you are. And for me, I'm more comfortable in this because I'm in my home space, and therefore I am being at home and not thinking about this sort of sights and smells and all of the things that go on when you go outside. So yeah, I think it's, and I like doing these things. I'll quite happily talk about my projects for hours.
It's brilliant. And it sounds like you have just as much going on as I do. So I kind of feel like we're
That's good to know.
kindred spirits in that way. So.
Yeah, because otherwise you wonder if, hang on, have I accepted too much? Where am I supposed to say no?
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day. I said, because someone's like, do you have difficulty saying no? And I said, no, not when it's something that I don't want to do. I said, the difficulty is that actually the exciting things and projects kind of come up. It's difficult to say no to those, but we will have to say no now to any more discussion.
To say no. I'll come back another time to do my neurodiversity rant, because that one's, I suppose, loads on that one I could go into.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure people would be really interested to hear that actually, and to have a conversation about that. And just thank you for sharing your insights, really, and for people to hear about, you know, your PhD journey and what that's been like. And hopefully I'm gonna have some other people on and to talk about their experiences, because sometimes I think it's like a bit of a, people hear little bits and pieces, but sometimes it's nice to actually hear people who've gone through that experience, and what you can lead to, and what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes you need that honesty as well, because it is difficult. It doesn't mean anyone intended it to be difficult, but that is how I received it. It was a difficult process, and you know, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate having done it. I'm glad I stuck it out. That is actually probably the positive message that I've got at the end of it. I am glad I stuck it out and got there, you know. So there'll be ups and downs.
Absolutely.
That's life.
I think that should be the note we leave it on.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you again. If you want to know more about Lesley's work, have a look in the show notes, and we'll put links to all of her research projects and podcasts that she's got going on. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.